Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie World Wars in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called World Wars. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you, I'm also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film. And I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, star casters' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video. World War Z is a 2013 American action horror film directed by Marc Forster, with a screenplay by Matthew Michael Carnahan, Drew Goddard, and Damon Lindelof, from a story by Carnahan and J. Michael Straczynski. Inspired by the 2006 novel of the same name by Max Brooks, it stars Brad Pitt as Jerry Lane, a former United Nations investigator who travels the world seeking a solution for a sudden zombie apocalypse. 12. Along with an ensemble supporting cast including Mireille Enos, James Badge Dale, and Matthew Fox. Pitt's Plan B Entertainment secured the film rights to Brooks' novel in 2007, and Straczynski was approached to write, and Forster was approached to direct. In 2009, Carnahan was hired to rewrite the script. With a planned December 2012 release and a projected budget of $125 million, filming began in July 2011 in Malta, before moving to Glasgow in August and Budapest in October. The production suffered some setbacks, and in June 2012, the release date was pushed back, and the crew returned to Budapest for 7 weeks of additional shooting. Damon Lindelof was hired to rewrite the third act, but did not have time to finish the script, and Drew Goddard was hired to finish the rewrite. The reshoots took place between September and October 2012, ballooning the budget to a reported $190 million, although some publications have listed it as high as $269 million. World War Z premiered in London on June 2, 2013, and was chosen to open the 35th Moscow International Film Festival. It premiered in New York and Los Angeles on June 14th, and was theatrically released elsewhere in the United States on June 21st. Reviews were generally positive, with praise for Pitt's performance and for the film as a revival of the zombie genre, but criticism of what some felt was an anticlimax and a lack of faithfulness to the source material. The film was a commercial success, grossing over $540 million against a production budget of $190 million, making it the highest-grossing zombie film of all time. Revived plans for a sequel were announced 12 years after the film's release, following the earlier cancellation due to financial issues. Plot: former United Nations investigator Gerald "Jerry" Lane, his wife Karen, and their two daughters, Rachel and Connie, are caught in traffic in downtown Philadelphia when a zombie outbreak hits. Escaping the ensuing chaos, they travel to Newark and pick up Tommy, a young boy whose family hunkered down in their apartment and refused to leave. They are rescued by a helicopter sent by Thierry Umutoni, the UN Deputy Secretary General. The group is then taken to a U.S. Navy vessel stationed in the Atlantic Ocean, where a team of scientists studies the outbreak. Among them is virologist Andrew Fassbach, who believes that the plague is caused by a virus and that finding its origin is crucial for developing a vaccine. Faced with the threat of eviction from the vessel, Jerry reluctantly agrees to assist Fassbach. Jerry, Fassbach, and a Navy SEAL escort fly to Camp Humphreys in South Korea, where the first report of zombies was received. Upon arrival, the group is attacked by zombies, causing a panicked Fassbach to slip on the plane ramp and accidentally shoot himself dead. The team is saved by U.S. soldiers stationed at the camp, and Jerry discovers that the infection was brought to the base by its doctor. A CIA officer imprisoned there guides Jerry towards Israel, where the Mossad has established a secure area. In Jerusalem, Jerry encounters Jürgen Wormbrunn, a high-ranking Mossad official who mentions that intercepted communications of Indian troops fighting zombies is what led Israel to set up defenses. Jerusalem has protected itself by constructing a massive wall and allowing refugees to seek shelter within the city. However, the refugees' loud celebrations attract zombies, which instinctively form massive castels to overcome the wall. As the city becomes overrun, Warmbrun instructs Israeli soldiers to accompany Jerry back to his plane. Amidst the mayhem, Jerry observes zombies ignoring an elderly man and a malnourished boy. When one of Jerry's escorts, Sagan, is bitten on her hand, he amputates that limb to prevent her from turning. Together, they escape on a commercial airliner. Jerry redirects the plane to a medical research facility in Cardiff, owned by the World Health Organization. During the journey, a stowaway zombie attacks the passengers. To eliminate the zombies, Jerry detonates a grenade to breach the cabin and expel them, resulting in the plane's crash landing. With Jerry presumed killed, his family is relocated from the carrier to Nova Scotia. Jerry and Sagan survive the crash, although Jerry is trapped in his seat and has sustained injuries. Sagan comes to Jerry's aid, and together they reach the Cardiff facility. Exhausted and wounded, Jerry loses consciousness and wakes up 3 days later, having been treated by the WHO staff. Sharing his observations, Jerry deduces that the zombies ignore the sick or injured as they are not suitable hosts for spreading the infection. He proposes injecting healthy individuals with a curable pathogen as a form of camouflage against the zombies. The pathogen samples are in a section of the WHO facility infested with zombies. Jerry, Sagan, and the head doctor attempt to sneak through the lab but accidentally alert the zombies. The three are separated in a chaotic chase, with Sagan and the doctor forced to retreat, leaving Jerry the only one able to reach the samples. Jerry retrieves the samples but is unable to leave because of a lone zombie blocking his path. Out of options, Jerry tests his theory by injecting himself with a sample. As he opens the door, his theory is proven correct. The zombie ignores him completely. Jerry and Sagan reach a secure area in Freeport, Nova Scotia, and are reunited with Karen, Jerry's daughters, and Tommy, who is now being raised by Karen and Jerry. A vaccine is created, serving as stealth against the zombies, enabling civilians to evacuate infected regions safely and empowering the military to combat the zombies more effectively. Cast: Brad Pitt as Gerald Jerry Lane, a retired United Nations investigator who is recalled to duty to help search for a cure for the zombie pandemic. Mireille Enos as Karen Lane, Jerry's dedicated and supportive wife. Daniella Kertesz as Sagan, referred to by military rank rather than by name, an Israeli soldier who Jerry meets during his mission. James Badge Dale as Captain Speak, a U.S. Army Ranger stationed at Camp Humphreys in South Korea. David Morse as an ex-CIA officer imprisoned at Camp Humphreys for assisting North Korea's fight against the zombies. Fana Mokena as Thierry Umutoni, an Undersecretary General of the United Nations, Jerry's former boss who enlists him to escort the virologist. David Andrews as the U.S. Navy captain in charge of the vessel to which the Lane family is brought. Sterling Gerrans as Constance Lane, Jerry and Karen's younger daughter. Abigail Hargrove as Rachel Lane, Jerry and Karen's older daughter. Peter Capaldi as Britt, a WHO doctor in Wales. Pier Francesco Favino as Javier, the lead WHO doctor in Wales. Ruth Nega as Dr. Kelly, a WHO doctor in Wales. Moritz Bleibtreu as Dr. Ryan, a WHO doctor in Wales. Ludi Boken as Jürgen Warmbrun, a high-ranking Mossad official. Gregory Fitoussi as the C-130 pilot who flies Jerry from South Korea to Israel. In addition, Elise Gable plays Andrew Fassbach, a soon-dead virologist whom Jerry escorted to South Korea. Matthew Fox appears as a crew member of the Navy vessel the Lanes stay on, although most of his scenes were cut from the final film. Music. Main article: World War Z. In December 2011, it was reported that Marco Beltrami had signed on to score World War Z. In May 2013, the British rock band Muse posted a video on their YouTube channel that hinted they would be contributing to the soundtrack of the film, the song The Second Law, Isolated System, from their 2012 album The Second Law, and the instrumental version of Follow Me, produced by the electronic band Nero, were used. On June 18, 2013, Warner Bros. Records released the soundtrack album for the film, which featured the original score composed by Beltrami. Release World War Z was initially scheduled for release by Paramount and Skydance on December 21st, 2012, but in March 2012, it was pushed back to June 21st, 2013, with Paramount electing to release Jack Reacher on the December 2012 date. Its world premiere was held at the Empire Cinema in Leicester Square, London, on June 2nd, 2013. On June 6th, Brad Pitt attended screenings of the film in Atlanta, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Austin, all on the same day. The film was released at Glasgow's Grosvenor Cinema in Ashton Lane on June 19th, 2 days before its global launch, and opened the 35th Moscow International Film Festival the next day. In all, Paramount spent $160 million marketing the film worldwide. Home media. The film was released on Blu-ray and DVD on September 24, 2013. The Blu-ray release includes an unrated alternate cut of the film that features 7 minutes of additional footage, most of which consists of additional moments of violence and suspense in the action scenes. Reception. Box office. The film grossed $202.41 million in North America and $337.6 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $540 million. Variety called it a bona fide box office hit, although Deadline Hollywood later said it barely broke even. In North America, the film earned $25.2 million on its opening day, including $3.6 million from Thursday night and midnight shows. It went on to earn $66.4 million its opening weekend, finishing second to Monsters University at the box office. This was, at the time, the second largest opening weekend for a film that did not debut in first place, behind The Day After Tomorrow 2004 with $85.8 million. The largest opening weekend for a film starring Brad Pitt, and the sixth largest opening among films released in June. In other territories, the film earned $5.7 million on its opening day, Thursday, June 20th, 2013, and $45.8 million its opening weekend, ranking third. Review. World War Z. Another day, another zombie flick, albeit a bigger budget one with A-list bells on. In this adaptation of Max Brooks's cult novel, Brad Pitt plays an ex-UN investigator sent to seek out the source of an undead plague that has ravaged the earth, causing the warm-blooded to scuttle to sea or flee to the remote wilds of Nova Scotia. Unlike George Romero's lumbering corpses, these zombies boast the fleet-footedness of Zack Snyder's Dawn of the Dead reboot and the shaky cam craziness of Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later. There's some cross-infection, too, from Steven Soderbergh's Contagion, with which this shares its fears of accelerated global transmission. The opening is bravura fair, as the running, rather than walking dead, take unexpectedly to the streets, swarming like ants across a landscape littered with fragments of the source novel's socio-political satire. Israel protects itself with a massive wall. North Korea starts pulling out teeth. Yet somewhere the film loses its nerve and its bite, settling for disparate, grand-scale set pieces. Every time director Marc Forster shouted action, presumably a producer shouted more action, and episodic globe-trotting plot points, before finding its way to a medical center in Wales, really, for an oddly old-fashioned third act replete with men in white coats and glowering British TV stalwarts. Amid all the tales of spiraling budgets and extensive reshoots, it's hard not to conclude that whatever heart the project may once have had has been bypassed, leaving a raggedy assortment of body parts, expensively assembled but lacking a sustaining pulse. World War Z plays as if someone watched the similar 28 Days Later and thought, that was a good movie, but it would be better if it cost $200 million. There were armies of zombies, and the hero were perfect and played by Brad Pitt. Which is another way of saying that if you need proof that sometimes more can be less, here you go. Directed by Marc Forster and written by everyone in Hollywood, if rumors are to be believed, though 3 got credit, this adaptation of Max Brooks' oral history of a zombie apocalypse. Hold on. I'm sorry, but before we take this movie apart, let's take a closer look at that last phrase, oral history of a zombie apocalypse. Those 6 words tell you everything this film gave up by going in a conventional direction. I've never read Brooks's book and don't have any immediate plans to, but the notion of telling this tale in a roundabout way, by having survivors of the conflagration sit there and talk to an unseen camera person, perhaps against a plain black background, with or without cutaways to still photographs or news video, is electrifying to consider. Such an approach might have yielded the first fresh contribution to the zombie picture since Wreck. The latter viewed an undead attack through the eye of a home video camera and treated the result as found footage, a great post-Blair Witch embellishment, considering how much of horror's effectiveness lies in what you don't see. A faithful transcription of Brooks's source might have taken fright film minimalism even further. What better way to amplify the hideousness of the dead attacking the living than by fixing a camera's unblinking eye on the survivors as they talked about the homes and people and limbs they lost in the struggle? A friend who's heard the audiobook version of World War Z said it reminded her of old-time radio drama. Theater of the mind, she said. World War Z, in contrast, is just bloody eye and ear candy. I realize it's problematic to review a film on the basis of what it might have been, but when that same film substitutes a vision that's vastly less intriguing and original than the one offered by its source, it's a fair tactic. And what's on screen here is just another zombie picture, gigantic but otherwise unremarkable. It's not that scary until you get to the end. Ironically, what makes the end work is its embrace of old-fashioned zombie film values: intimacy, silence, suggestion, and the strategic deployment of boredom to lull viewers into complacency and set them up for the next big scare. World War Z is mostly David lean-on caffeine panoramas of computer-generated zombies swarming ant-like up walls and over barricades and taking down computer-generated choppers, while Forster's close-up camera swings all over the place to generate unearned excitement. The final set piece watches three people sneak into a lab that's overrun by a few dozen sleepy and distracted flesh snackers. It's slow, it's quiet, it's scary. It works. Sometimes when you reinvent the wheel, the result doesn't get you very far. Brad Pitt plays Jerry Lane, a former United Nations field agent who retired to spend time with his wife Karen, Mireille Enos, and their charming daughters. He's every other character played by Robert Redford in the 1970s and 80s. Noble, brave, calm in a crisis, endlessly resourceful, kind to his spouse and children, respectful of authority but not slavishly so, independent-minded but not arrogant, a snooze. Forster and his collaborators deserve credit for plunging us into the thick of things. The Lanes learn that society is collapsing when a seemingly ordinary urban traffic jam is jolted into surreality by an explosion, a stampede of terrified civilians and their vehicles, and a furious attack by people who've been infected by a virus that turns them into ravenous ghouls. The film's details are fuzzy, but I think they actually are ghouls here. Not just rabid and homicidal mortals, as in the Days pictures. The rest of the picture is a globe-trotting medical mystery that just happens to feature zombies, with Lane and various helpers, some military and others scientific, trying to figure out what sparked the disease and counter it before the undead overrun everything. It's Contagion, or the Andromeda strain, but with zombies and without much panache. Although Mireille Enos' talents are wasted, she anchors a police procedural on television, but this Hollywood movie is content to cast her as a standard-issue dutiful wife. There are some dandy cameos and supporting turns. I like David Morse's one scene as a twitchy, traumatized CIA agent who knows something about the origin of the disease, and James Badge Dale as a U.S. Special Forces captain whose gung-ho competence is no match for the zombie hordes. And Daniella Kertesz as Segan, an Israeli soldier whose indefatigable spirit helps the hero save the day even after she suffered unimaginable trauma. But aside from Sagan, none of the characters rise above the level of purely functional placeholder types, and there are too many scenes that replicate zombie film tropes, minus the passionate invention that other films have brought to the task. When a supporting character is infected and instantly turns, I was reminded of that masterful sequence in 28 Days Later, in which Brendan Gleeson's jovial dad catches a drop of contaminated blood in his eye and battles the virus while his daughter looks on. The poor bastard goes through a whole existential crisis in less than a minute. The sheer terror of losing one's soul has rarely been communicated so economically. Nothing in World War Z comes anywhere near that scene's power. Forster deserves credit, I guess, for finding a way to make a PG-13 zombie movie without totally softening it. Horrendous violence occurs off-camera or below the frame line, but doesn't lack for impact. There are some shiveringly good moments near the end, particularly when Jerry gets too close to a walker with snicker-snack rat teeth. But elsewhere, you may feel as though a genre's essence has been betrayed. Forster has made a zombie movie for people who don't like zombie movies. That's not the sort of accomplishment one should brag about. Rising from an early grave of negative pre-release publicity, director Marc Forster and producer star Brad Pitt's much-maligned World War Z emerges as a surprisingly smart, gripping, and imaginative addition to the zombie movie canon, owing as much to scientific disaster movies like The China Syndrome and Contagion, as it does to undead urtext like the collected works of George Romero. Showing few visible signs of the massive rewrites, reshoots, and other post-production patchwork that delayed its release from December 2012, this sleekly crafted, often nail-biting tale of global zombie apocalypse clicks on both visceral and emotional levels, resulting in an unusually serious-minded summer entertainment whose ideal audience might be described as comic book fanboys who also listen to Democracy Now! Opening a week apart from the more four-quadrant-friendly Man of Steel in most markets, World War Z should post solid enough numbers at home and abroad, but with a rumored final cost well north of $200 million, it'll need more than a bit of kryptonite up its sleeve to push far into profitability. A flexible metaphor for all manner of social, cultural, and political maladies, the zombie genre has over the decades been employed as an analog for everything from the U.S. occupation of Haiti, 1932's Bela Lugosi starrer White Zombie, to the upheaval of the Vietnam Civil Rights era, Night of the Living Dead, and the biopanics of the late 20th century, 28 Days Later, Resident Evil. Significantly expanding the claustrophobic geography of most zombie picks, the aptly titled World War Z doesn't have a particular polemical axe to grind, so much as it seeks to imagine how the world's ideologically disparate peoples and governments would respond if great masses of the populace did suddenly turn into rabid, flesh-eating beasties. In what may be taken as an affront by the America First crowd, the old US of A descends into chaos pretty early on. While the two nations best equipped for the coming onslaught turn out to be Israel and North Korea, the former by building an enormous wall, the latter by extracting the teeth of its entire population. No biting, no zombies, see? Not that any makeshift solution lasts for long in World War Z, whose undead prove terrifyingly hardy and lightning quick, sprinting into spastic action when they sense fresh meat is near, and turning their victims into fellow travelers in a matter of seconds. We first seen them wreaking havoc on a downtown Philly traffic jam, a genuinely spectacular and unsettling orgy of mob panic, from which world-weary ex-United Nations investigator Jerry Lane, Pitt, barely emerges with his wife, Karen, Mireille Enos, two young daughters, and own body fully intact. Fleeing in a stolen camper, they hightail it to Newark, where they await extraction from Jerry's former UN boss, Thierry, the excellent South African actor Fana Mokoena, but not before waiting out the night in a rundown apartment building transformed by Forster into a skin-crawling succession of winding, shadowy corridors and flickering fluorescent bulbs. The generally arresting cinematography is credited solely to Michael Bay collaborator Ben Sarisen, though the pick was begun by Oscar winner Robert Richardson. Adapted by a small army of screenwriters from the best-selling novel by Max, son of Mel Brooks, the pick abandons its source material's choral oral history structure to hone in on the Lanes, who, after once again negotiating a narrow escape, find themselves ensconced in the relative safety of an aircraft carrier somewhere in the Atlantic. At this de facto command center for what remains of the U.S. military, Thierry wastes no time in giving Jerry an ultimatum. Go back into the war zone on the UN's behalf, or else be sent right back to zombie-infested Philly with his family in tow. And from there, World War Z hopscotches the globe as Jerry, in the company of various military escorts, searches for the proverbial patient zero and the possibility of a cure. Photos Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie attend World War Z premiere. Something the writers and Forster have cribbed well from the Romero playbook. They waste little time with scene-setting niceties, plunging us straight into the thick of zombie mayhem, and Pitt notwithstanding, they don't afford anyone star treatment. Characters who initially seem poised to become significant supporting players. Among them, Army Rangers James Badge Dale and Matthew Fox and rogue CIA operative David Morse prove expendable, either by becoming food for the encroaching zombie horde or simply by virtue of the pick moving on to another locale. First, a ghostly military base in South Korea that might be the source of the outbreak. Then to Israel, where a senior Mossad agent, well played by Dutch filmmaker Ludi Boken, may hold some additional clues. And finally, a WHO research lab in Wales, where, in the pick's most elegantly crafted set piece, Jerry and a handful of uninfected scientists enter into a careful cat-and-mouse game with the otherwise zombified staff. Considering the incoherent shambles he made out of his James Bond movie, Quantum of Solace, Forster handles the large-scale action here with considerable aplomb and much striking imagery, enhanced by the seamless mix of choreography, prosthetics, and CG that bring the herking, jerking zombies to life. That these zombies have particularly sensitive hearing allows Forster and his sound designers a field day with creaking doors, broken glass crunching underfoot, and in one especially tense moment, a soda can rolling across a cafeteria floor. Moreover, the director always keeps the movie rooted in a compelling dramatic situation, with Pitt giving a very appealing turn as the seen-it-all veteran of the world's worst places whose desire to protect his family trumps his desire to save the world. By today's standards, he's a refreshingly human-scaled movie hero, with no outsized strength, agility, or superpowers to help him win the day. Despite having little screen time and even less dialogue, the marvelous Enos manages to suggest a full range of wifely and motherly emotions through the subtlest of glances and smiles that mask her pain. Israeli-born newcomer Daniella Kertesz also makes a strong impression as the soldier who accompanies Jerry on the last leg of his journey, including a harrowing Jerusalem-Cardiff flight with some most unfriendly passengers in coach. One rare exception for me was Warm Bodies, which took a different angle by portraying zombies who long to return to normally. I actually enjoyed that one quite a bit. As for World War Z, the premise is a mysterious virus believed to have originated in the Korea, spreading across the planet through modern air travel. The infected here are far from the staggering, sluggish zombies of old. They're fast, ravenous, and far more terrifying. These creatures move faster than expected, behaving like rabid beasts, snapping their jaws as though desperate to devour anything in reach. It's a dire scenario that threatens the entire world. Brad Pitt steps in as Gary Lane, a former UN investigator who only wishes to live peacefully with his wife and 2 daughters. When Philadelphia collapses, under the outbreak, the family flees toward New York and eventually finds safety on a military vessel. However, Gary is pressured against his will to assist in tracing and stopping the spread of the zombie plague, as his family's safety is conditional on his cooperation. The plot follows Gary as he travels first to Korea, then Israel, and later a WH research facility in Wales, surviving near-death experiences, including a catastrophic plane crash. He carries the burden of saving humanity because no one else can. I enjoy Brad Pitt as an actor, and he does a fine job here, though the movie itself strikes me as rather silly. At times, I caught myself laughing not at the grim violence, but at how absurd the zombies appeared in their relentless drive to consume everything. It plays best as light action entertainment and little more. The ending attempts to deliver a profound message, but for me, it fell flat. Spoilers. Gary ultimately manages to push the world toward survival. During his journey, he observes that certain individuals are ignored by the infected, which leads him to theorize that the zombies instinctively avoid the seriously ill, preferring healthy hosts to carry their infection forward. He tests his theory by deliberately infecting himself with a virus which causes the zombies to leave him unharmed. This breakthrough sparks the idea of using deliberate infection as a defense. People could be temporarily inoculated with treatable diseases, deterring attacks and allowing time to fight back. A clever twist, at least in concept. Still, it makes me nostalgic for the era when zombie films remained a small, frowned-upon subgenre. Ever since the surprise success of 28 Days Later and Shaun of the Dead, zombies have exploded into mainstream pop culture, becoming a lucrative industry. Within just a few years, the market has been saturated with uninspired gore fests and weak comedic spins. Now things have gone even further, with a list filmmakers and top Hollywood actors like Brad Pitt leading massive studio-backed productions. World War Z is not inherently a poor film. It benefits from slick visuals, high-end production quality, and skilled actors. For general audiences, the script likely delivers enough suspense and surprises to keep them invested. Yet, for longtime fans of the genre, it has little originality. Every supposedly shocking moment is painfully predictable, recycled from countless earlier zombie tailies, only now dressed up with an enormous budget. Ironically, the PG-13 rating strips away the very gore and chaos that horror fans expect, with much of the violence happening off-screen. Nearly every detail in the storyline comes across as either far-fetched or derivative. The outbreak of the virus, the chaos that tears through the streets of Philadelphia, families being separated, the hunt for patient zero, and the origin of the infection. And even Brad Pitt's brilliant tactic to temporarily keep the undead at bay. All of it comes across as entirely predictable. On the rare occasions when the plot doesn't follow obvious beats, it slips into sheer absurdity. A prime example is Pitt and his Israeli soldier companion, miraculously walking away from a plane crash that no human being could realistically survive. The line, referenced in the user's original comment, is spoken by Dr. Fazbach, a supposedly renowned variologist portrayed as mankind's great hope. He arrogantly heads to South Korea with a full team, only to immediately prove his incompetence by tripping and accidentally shooting himself dead. Ironically, that moment stands out as one of the film's highlights, along with the much-talked-about Israeli zombie. Wall, World War Z 2013 is one of the titles I own on DVD and recently revisited on Netflix. The narrative is straightforward. A zombie outbreak erupts from a blood-borne virus. A man with a background in special operations narrowly survives with his wife and children, but quickly realizes that to keep them protected, he must cooperate with the United Nations in tracing the epidemic back to its source and perhaps discovering a cure. Whether or not he can endure such a perilous mission is the central question. Directed by Marc Forster, Finding Neverland. The movie stars Brad Pitt, Fight Club, Mireille Enos, Gangster Squad, Daniella Kertesz, Incitement, James Badal, The Departed, David Morse, The Green Mile, and Ruth Negga, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Visually, it delivers with sharp cinematography and polished special effects. This is Hollywood horror in its purest form. A glossy production boasting a strong ensemble, a linear plot, and exaggerated action sequences that border on ridiculous but remain entertaining to watch. While the plane crash is laughably implausible, the helicopter sequence and the infamous Wall of Jerusalem are undeniably memorable. The camouflage solution, on the other hand, felt so far-fetched that it made me roll my eyes. Still, the makeup work and the snarling, gnashing zombie effects are top tier, and more horror films should take note of such visceral sound design. Pitt himself, however, doesn't entirely convince as the lead. He plays Gary Lane, a former UN investigator forced back into service when the living dead consumed the globe. The cause of the plague remains uncertain, but the devastation is swift and merciless. Victims transform within seconds of being bitten, sometimes within half a minute. After securing a tentative safe haven for his family, Gary journeys across the world in a desperate search for answers. This loose blockbuster scale adaptation of Max Brooks' novel The author, being the son of comedy legend Mel Brooks, spares no effort in providing spectacle. Under Forster's direction, the film bombards viewers with extravagant set pieces designed to stave off boredom. Yet for every ludicrously overblown action sequence, there are smaller human-driven moments and suspenseful interludes, particularly the finale at the World Health Organization facility, where Gary stealthily maneuvers around zombies to test his theory of a possible solution. No other zombie film comes close to featuring such sheer numbers of the undead, attacking with animalistic rage and swarming hordes. Unfortunately, heavy reliance on CGI makes many of these large-scale battles unintentionally comical rather than purely thrilling. Jerry's repeated brushes with death stretch believability to the point of absurdity, as if he has the luck of 9 lives. Still, the internationally diverse cast, including Mireille Enos, Daniella Kertesz, James Badale, Ludi Boken, Fana Makona, Alice, Gable, Peter Capaldi, Ruth Negga, among others, lends credibility and weight to the material, grounding the chaos with committed performances. David Morse delivers a striking cameo as a deranged former CIA operative, adding a touch of eccentric energy to the story. The main character, Gary, isn't given much depth, yet Brad Pitt still manages to embody him as a solid and believable hero. The film remains engaging throughout, though it never quite reaches the greatness it seems to aim for. At times it feels overly familiar, as if recycling ideas audiences have already seen before. That said, director Marc Forster and his team waste no time, diving straight into chaos within the opening 10 minutes and generating intense disaster sequences right away. Pitt headlines this large-scale thriller centered on a global zombie epidemic, a story stitched together from scenes of frenzied hordes, an ordinary man tasked with averting catastrophe. At first, the Lane family seems to be living a picture of stability and hope, but that serenity doesn't last long in a world where calm can shatter at any moment. A strange virus has unleashed a terrifying wave of zombies, infecting the healthy at lightning speed and threatening to engulf humanity. Though reluctant, Gary is compelled to embark on a worldwide journey to uncover the cause and possibly solution before civilization collapses. Against impossible odds, he pushes forward in a desperate quest to outpace the apocalypse. This massive production immerses viewers from start to finish, carried by Pitt's presence. Really, if he can't make this work, then who could? World War Z holds a PG-1 rating for its intense and unsettling depictions of zombie carnage. The supporting cast features Mireille Enos, James Badale, David Morse, Peter Capaldi, Sterling Jirens, and Abigail Harov. Essentially, it's a familiar zombie narrative elevated by top-tier production and star power. Traditionally, zombie stories have thrived as low-budget horror fare, their rough edges enhancing the bleakness of the genre. Most follow similar story beats, leading to countless films that blur together in memory. Only the satirical or comedic twists like Shaun of the Dead, Zombieland, or even Warm Bodies have brought fresh variations to the formula. Plot-wise, World War Z offers nothing groundbreaking, but its Hollywood polish and Pitt star appeal separated from the pack. The large-scale effects and sweeping visuals create a sense of frightening realism, almost convincing you that such a nightmare could unfold in the real world. Pitt's dual performance as both tough action figure and protective father works smoothly, though his marquee status clearly outshines the rest of the cast. Aside from smaller appearances from David Morse, Matthew Fox, and Moritz Biel, there aren't many notable names, though Peter Capaldi's inclusion is a fun surprise for fans. Going in, many viewers might expect aliens or some other unknown threat, but the movie wastes little time clarifying the zombie plague. It follows in the footsteps of apocalyptic thrillers like The Walking Dead, I Am Legend, 28 Days, later and Contagion, presenting yet another grim variation of global collapse. Still, whether or not you're usually into zombie stories, this one is worth watching. For genre fans, it delivers the spectacle they crave, and for others, it avoids the grotesque extremes of brain-munching horror. opting instead for large-scale suspense and non-stop momentum. The undead in this film exist purely to pass along their infection, moving at breakneck speed with the singular goal of biting once to ensure transmission. It's made obvious that humans are nothing more than carriers for a malicious virus. The movie thrives on high-rung tension and impressive visuals with sequences that resemble swarms of rabbit ants overwhelming anything in their path. It delivers as a pulse-pounding thriller following Gary Brad Pitt on his dangerous quest to uncover both the origins of the plague and a possible solution. World War Z, under the direction of Marc Forster, stands as one of the large-scale blockbusters in his eclectic filmography. It opens with a gripping New York traffic jam sequence that quickly escalates into a massive evacuation brought on by zombie chaos. Pitt's character sets out to discover the source of the outbreak, but the execution of his investigation lacks real weight or intensity. What follows devolves into a frantic chase narrative that leaves little room for depth in its supporting cast. While the film does entertain, it fails to etch a strong emotional impact. Even though the set piece of zombies scaling a towering wall is visually stunning, it ultimately reduces the film to disposable spectacle. The PG-13 rating strips away the very gore and horror that the genre demands, leaving instead a glossy, watered-down version. Instead of flesh-ripping terror, audiences are presented with waves of sprinting, leaping zombies captured in sweeping length, aerial shots that render them insect-like rather than menacingly undead. The production delivers this relentlessly, but certain story choices weigh it down. The Israel wall sequence, for instance, can be interpreted as a veiled political message, drawing unwanted subtext into the spectacle. Later, when Pitt's character seeks answers at the World Health Organization, scientists casually list viruses like they were flavors in an ice cream shop. SRS, Ebola, smallpox framed as though these dangerous agents are humanity's salvation, a notion that remains questionable. Despite its flaws, the movie provides enough action to satisfy younger viewers and casual audiences. Its massive budget and Pitt's star power elevated above standard zombie fare, though it often feels more like an extravagant distraction than a meaningful entry in the genre. Hardcore zombie enthusiasts may be disappointed by the tone-down violence, but others will likely find enough thrills to let it pass. The story, adapted loosely from Max Brooks' well-known novel, hints at the early stages of a zombie virus, serving almost as a prequel to films like 28 Days Later, Dawn of the Dead, Zombieland, or I Am Legend, which focus instead on the aftermath. The marketing never fully explained what the film was about beyond Pitt's involvement, leaving audiences uncertain of his role until the movie itself revealed its different approach, one that tries to stand apart by reimagining the start of the undead, evolution rather than the aftermath. The reason I mention this is because the very sequence shown in the trailer, where he is in the car with his family amidst all the chaos, actually takes place right at the beginning of the movie. Almost immediately someone becomes infected, and we see firsthand how quickly a person transforms into a zombie. This transformation is carefully observed by Gary Lane, played by Brad Pitt, portrayed as a doctor here, though Entertainment Weekly describes him more as a strategic army man. While he struggles to get his family to safety, New York City is plunged into utter devastation as the outbreak spreads, uncontrollably faster and deadlier than any plague in history. Instead of rats carrying disease, it is zombies overwhelming the city. Few human survivors remain, but even they seem doomed to eventually fall victim to the infection. The story narrows its focus on Pitt's family, making their survival our primary concern, while the fates of countless others feel tragic but distant. His past as a government employee, once holding an influential role, gives him and his family access to protection not available to the masses. This advantage becomes their lifeline as he faces near-death encounters that resemble the stuff of nightmares. Despite the movie's numerous rewrites and postponed release dates, Pitt's presence is the anchor that holds it together. His character's devotion to his wife and daughters, as well as his willingness to take another child under his care, mirrors his own family values, lending authenticity to his role. He embodies the family man caught in impossible decisions, and that element of humanity is rarely explored in zombie films, no matter how many of them exist. The outbreak is said to have originated in the Far East, spreading like wildfire across the globe in the form of a rabies-like virus with no cure in sight. Ordinary people are turned into savage attackers who infect others within seconds. Once Philadelphia is hit, Gary is drawn back into service, tasked with helping the United Nations trace the origins and search for a solution. While the storyline itself follows a familiar formula seen countless times in other zombie tailies, what sets this film apart is the enormous budget funneled into its production. The result is a spectacle filled with non-stop action, impressive CGI, varied international settings, and a respectable cast. What it lacks, however, is gore, an essential element in most zombie features, which causes it to fall short when compared to classics like 28 Days Later or Day of the Dead. That said, the film still offers plenty of high-octane moments and suspenseful sequences. Even if they aren't enough to fully satisfy, viewers don't need to be gore enthusiasts to notice the absence of grit. Still, with the overwhelming marketing push behind it, my reservations likely won't matter much. Overall, I found it entertaining enough, though for the scale of money invested, it could have been far better. When a relentless zombie pandemic strikes humanity, Pitt's character embarks on a globe-spanning mission to trace its beginnings and search for a cure, desperate to save mankind. In the end, the film turned out to be an unexpectedly enjoyable ride. One of the film's stronger qualities lies in how it approaches the infection without overcomplicating or dragging out the concept. Framing the spread as a global journey works surprisingly well, filling much of the runtime with the depiction of various containment efforts at different stages. This framing device effectively transitions the shock of the outbreak into the central narrative of a worldwide investigation. The biggest highlight, however, comes through in the pulse-pounding action sequences, which are both thrilling and unexpectedly elaborate. The opening swarm ripping through traffic choked New York makes for a spectacular ambush, followed by tense but smaller moments like the supermarket encounter or the desperate escape from the apartment. All of these ultimately build toward the large-scale set piece in Israel, where the Horde relentlessly climbs the towering fortified walls before swarming the survivors below. This breathtaking spectacle anchors the film's most memorable escape sequence. The movie certainly delivers grandeur and spectacle, but in doing so, it also exposes its heavy reliance on CGI. The issue isn't necessarily poor visuals, but rather that the swarms often look artificial, their movement exaggerated to the point of breaking immersion. Despite some standout scenes, the realism falters under the weight of digital effects. Add to this the absence of gore, which shifts the focus away from gruesome shock and towards survival, and you get a film that works on its own terms. I'm aware the production faced notorious difficulties, yet three strengths stood out clearly. To me, the abrupt and unnerving transition from everyday life to overwhelming human waves, the subversion of the traditional zombie formula that usually gives lengthy build-up before the slow, inevitable threat arrives, and the clever pacing which overwhelms both the characters and the audience with chaos, faster than it can be understood. The result is a tsunami-like force of panic, where fear arises from not knowing what is happening, but only from seeing desperate crowds scrambling to escape. Even in this shared confusion, the protagonist stands apart, absorbing events and adapting faster than anyone else, a role emphasized by Brad Pitt's presence and the film being shaped around him. This makes the opening portion especially strong as it tackles the hardest part of the narrative with precision. Another inventive touch is how the first two-thirds, portraying not just zombies but waves of zombies acting less like individual creatures and more like a living, destructive force. It recalls earlier cinematic breakthroughs where water itself, like in Perfect Storm or Titanic, was given form, weight, and a personality as a threatening presence. We once had Hereafter, where Eastwood directed a tsunami as if it were intentional. In this case, the crowds are depicted almost like flowing water, with the computer effects originally designed for simulating waves being reimagined as bodies pushing against gravity. It's a clever approach and in many ways a true step forward in visual storytelling. I should note this reaction is based on the 2D version. I can't imagine how a 3D conversion would improve anything. On top of the visuals, the script delivers a few surprisingly strong pieces of writing, which my writer friend also pointed out. These moments show up in places where audiences would normally expect dry exposition, technical chatter about labs or probes, the usual filler. Instead, the film gives us something unexpected. The first example comes with a Harvard prodigy introduced as humanity's greatest chance of understanding the situation. Rather than droning on about science, he delivers a striking monologue on the fragile unpredictability of violent nature. It's brief but powerful, and then he is killed off. The second supposed great hope is another familiar archetype, the Jewish doctor. His dialogue also avoids cliché, and instead of bland exposition, he delivers a reflection on perception itself. This ties subtly into the hero's emerging gift, which at that stage of the story was only just beginning to surface. Unfortunately, all of this originality unravels in the final act when the movie stumbles over the classic struggle of how to end things. The zombies are suddenly treated as individuals again, and the plot slips back into conventional genre beats. It's still tense and functional in the traditional sense, but nowhere near the inventive brilliance of the earlier sections that shifted how we looked at the story. If ever a movie sold itself on its trailer, this is it. I never read the source novel, though I know it's structured as a collection of reports documenting a reshaped world after a zombie plague, making the film feel more like a prequel than an adaptation. I admired Danny Boyle's groundbreaking 28 Days Later and even enjoyed its sequel. So with that franchise seemingly finished, this felt like it could be its spiritual continuation, maybe even a 28 months later. The trailers fueled that hope, especially with the imagery of waves of the infected crashing against heavily armed defenses, setting expectations for a potential zombie classic. But the result doesn't match that promise. In fact, the movie often feels like it was made by zombies themselves. Right from the start, it stumbles with its incomprehensible outbreak. Unlike 28 Days Later, which gave audiences a clear beginning with the escape of the rage virus world, War Z deliberately keeps the origins vague, weakening its own foundation. Instead of a solid setup, we get scattered news clips hinting at a global crisis before cutting to Brad Pitt's character stuck in Philadelphia, traffic with his family. Almost instantly, chaos erupts as people flee their cars and rabid zombies pour through the streets. While this sequence has some impact, it also exposes two major flaws. First, the incubation period is mere seconds, almost identical to 28 Days Later. Realistically, a virus that contagious would burn through populations so fast it could never spread across continents, which undermines later events. Second, the film makes it difficult for the audience to truly invest in the scenario. It feels hollow. I know I couldn't believe in it. As the story moves on, Pitt scientist, I avoid his character's name since he hardly feels like one, is quickly whisked to South Korea, then to Israel, where the nation has miraculously walled itself off from the plague. Well, that was fast, you might think, and with good reason. The idea that the Israelis could have built such an immense wall within days of the outbreak strains credibility unless you count the MSAD chief's claim that he had received warnings weeks earlier from India about their army battling the infected. Still, the film never explains why such explosive news never reached the global media, nor why Israel alone seemed impenetrable while the rest of the world collapsed. The Jerusalem sequences are visually striking, but they lack internal consistency. Behind the protective barrier, Israel generously admits refugees, even as swarms of zombies batter the walls. In the middle of the chaos, Brad Pitt's character amputates the hand of a wounded female soldier to save her from infection, an act that pushes plausibility. These Israelis are tough, someone quips, and women already endure blood and pain every month, though it hardly compares to losing a hand. Soon after, Brad contacts the UN and is ordered to travel to a World Health Organization lab in Wales. Why? There are no closer facilities between Jerusalem and Cardiff is anyone's guess. On the plane, a stowaway zombie emerges from hiding, infecting passengers until the soldier detonates a grenade, sending the aircraft crashing into Wales. Somehow, she and Brad survive and manage to walk to the research center. Though, the idea that someone could handle blood loss from an amputation and still track onward is hard to swallow. And if Britain is an island, wouldn't quarantine have been far simpler, especially when Israel managed it? But logical questions are brushed aside with a sit-down and stopped thinking. The script keeps piling on coincidences and contrived luck. Despite constant reminders that zombies are drawn to noise, someone inevitably fires a gun. The supposed solution at the end feels nonsensical, yet conveniently ensures humanity can now focus on eradicating the undead. But wouldn't the zombies die? Of thirst anyway, one might ask, only to be told again to be quiet. Had the plot made even a little sense, the movie could have risen above being just another flashy summer blockbuster. Everything about it screams commercial intent. Brad Pitt jetting across the globe, interacting with multiple nationalities feels like a calculated move for broader audience appeal. Likewise, the deliberate absence of blood and gore appears designed to draw in viewers normally put off by the zombie or post-apocalyptic genre. Unfortunately, those same audiences will notice the shallow storytelling, while die-hard horror fans will be disappointed by the sanitized violence. What remains is a film that sacrifices coherence for marketability. And so, while the relentless pace is its greatest asset, zombies racing across the screen at breakneck speed, the film never rises to the level of a smart or truly terrifying classic. Traditional zombies once shuffled slowly from their Caribbean roots, first popularized in White Zombie. 1930, controlled by voodoo spells. Here they sprint with animal fury, but the film itself runs too fast for its own good. Unlike the slow, shuffling corpses that audiences are accustomed to, the undead in World War Z sprint with feral determination. These relentless, flesh-obsessed creatures are hardly groundbreaking, since Italian cinema had already introduced running zombies back in Nightmare City 1980, where radioactive ghouls stormed off airplanes wielding machetes, knives, axes, and even guns. Many horror fans, however, recall 28 Days Later, 2003, as their first encounter with fast-moving infected. In truth, the concept predates World War Z. Though loosely tied to Max Brooks' celebrated novel, the movie condenses multiple storylines into a singular thread for pacing, ending ambiguously with chaos still unfolding, whereas Brooks' book resolved the conflict. Brad Pitt embodies a United Nations operative of sorts, but instead of conducting survivor interviews like in the novel, his mission is far more direct. Readers of Brooks' work may be disappointed with the liberties taken by director Marc Forster, Quantum of Solace, and screenwriters Matthew Michael Carnian. The Kingdom, Drew Goddard, Cloverfield, and Damon Lindelof lost. Likewise, zombie enthusiasts lament the absence of gore, since the film aims for a bloodless PG-13 rating, stripping away the gruesome carnage typical of the genre. Ironically, television's The Walking Dead offers more visceral zombie violence than this big-budget studio release. Forster throws viewers directly into the turmoil. Beginning with the Lane family in Philadelphia, Gary Lane Pitt, a Fight Club, a retired United Nations problem solver known for his efficiency, lives peacefully with his wife Karen Morales of Gangster Squad and their young daughters Constance, Sterling Girons, and Rachel Abigail Hargrove. Domestic bliss quickly collapses when helicopters circle overhead and police motorcades surge past them as reports on the radio mention a rabies outbreak. Soon Derry witnesses a man transform into a zombie within moments. After their vehicle stalls, he seizes another and drives his family to a high-rise apartment for temporary refuge awaiting evacuation. His old UN superior, Thierry Umatonyi Fam Makona Safe House, dispatches a helicopter to airlift them from the rooftop just before zombies close in. The family is transported to a U.S. naval fleet stationed in the Atlantic, where Gary learns grim news. The president has perished. The vice president is missing, and America itself is overrun. Officials insist he track down Patient Zero to locate the origin of the outbreak. Whereas Brooks' novel placed the epidemic's genesis in China, the film conveniently relocates it to South Korea, echoing Hollywood's tendency to swap Chinese antagonists for Koreans as seen in Team America, World Police, or the Red Dawn remake. Gary initially resists, but is told his family will be sent back to zombie-ravaged Philadelphia unless he cooperates. From then on, the film rarely pauses except for necessary exposition. Forster orchestrates grand sequences of zombies piling atop each other like rabbit ants, hurling themselves suicidally at towering walls to create living ladders, overwhelming defenses with sheer numbers and blind ferocity. In this film, the zombies are triggered by sound, ferociously attacking anything that makes noise, instead of leaning on the usual overdone gore and entrails that dominate most grindhouse-style zombie flicks. Marc Forster builds tension around how the protagonists maneuver quietly to avoid detection. One particularly nerve-wracking moment unfolds inside a laboratory where the survivors attempt to sneak past the infected, only to have their cover blown by the slightest noise, which unleashes immediate carnage. While it does employ familiar genre tropes, World War Z shifts the formula by introducing a clever workaround that allows humans to escape notice. Essentially, Forster and the writers devise a viral camouflage, much like smearing zombie innards on yourself, so the creatures mistake you for one of them. Although the concept is interesting, its believability falters and the story begins to lose momentum. Without giving too much away, Gary and humanity discover a way to stall the outbreak and gain a fighting chance. Even as the military casually dubs the infected Zeeks, the tense sequences at the airport mid-flight and later inside a medical research lab keep the suspense alive, though by the final act, the outcome feels inevitable. Brad Pitt's hero will survive, and his family will remain safe. For the most part, the movie avoids gallows humor and plays the scenario straight, unlike zombie films from the 1970s that reveled in gory spectacle. World War Z steers clear of excessive bloodshed. Under the direction of Marc Forster for works as diverse as Finding Neverland 2004 and Quantum of Solace 2008, the film stakes its identity on scale, living up to the title by showcasing a literal global war against the undead with sprawling international backdrops and swarms numbering in the thousands. The sweeping CGI shots are striking, often showing hordes clambering over towering walls or overrunning entire cities. Some of the most ambitious imagery the zombie genre has seen. Ultimately, Forster delivers an effective summer blockbuster with several standout moments. The strongest comes in the opening 25 to 30 minutes, when Gary and his family flee Philadelphia amid chaos, a sequence brimming with urgency and genuine horror elements. Unfortunately, the movie doesn't offer much depth beyond that. From the start, it's clear this isn't a character-driven story. After a brief introduction to Pitt's family, the chaos erupts and the pace rarely slows down. Forster keeps the momentum relentless, minimizing quiet, personal beats in favor of nonstop motion. The film unfolds through 6 distinct large-scale action sequences that both thrill and propel the story forward. Among the most Impactful is the Jerusalem attack, where a joyous gathering that symbolizes peace between Palestinians and Israelis devolves into a massacre as swarms of the undead breach the walls, an unsettling echo of real-world conflicts. The direction injects the film with a hectic pace, reflecting the raw aggression of its creatures. These are not sluggish monsters, but rather raid predators driven by an insatiable hunger and behaving with the madness of an uncontrollable mob. During the first 2 acts, Forster's lens keeps its distance, avoiding close-ups of the zombies' faces and presenting them instead as chaotic, faceless swarms. Only occasionally does the camera grant us a fleeting close-up designed primarily to jolt the audience, enhanced further by the 3D effects. By the third act, however, as Gary becomes more accustomed to the undead and the narrative demands a closer look, Forster ventures into medium shots, highlighting the impressive makeup effects of his crew and even daring to slip in a brief subjective angle. Equally striking is the deliberate absence of blood or graphic gore, with the film leaning heavily on suspense over shock value, a choice that also conveniently secures a lower rating. This stylistic restraint shifts attention squarely onto the protagonist. Jerry's traits as a father, his devotion to his daughters, and his deep bond with his wife are swiftly established, while his intelligence and adaptability under pressure soon reveal his professional strengths. Brad Pitt, the film's sole marquee name, embraces the role with intensity, embodying Gary with both urgency and vulnerability. He never portrays him as an invulnerable hero, but rather as a man whose decisions, always logically reasoned, keep the audience invested in his fate. Through Jerry's interactions with others, the film raises questions about love, loyalty, and compassion. While secondary, the figures lack extensive development, they are not reduced to disposable victims for shock value. Notably, the female characters shine. Mireille Enos as Jerry's resilient wife. Karen conveys the weight of their marriage through subtle glances and sparse dialogue, while Daniella Kertesz delivers a standout performance as the courageous Israeli soldier who aids him, often stealing scenes with her resilience. Veteran David Morris also makes a brief but memorable appearance as an eccentric CIA agent, adding texture to the supporting cast. Yet, despite these strengths, the film suffers from repetitiveness. From the opening scenes onward, the same formula reappears, merely transplanted into new locations with fresh supporting characters and larger set pieces. This episodic structure becomes especially apparent during the massive Jerusalem sequence, widely advertised in trailers and posters. Although visually striking and technically impressive, its placement in the story feels forced and implausible, even by the standards of a fantastical narrative. The justification for the wall's construction, its very existence, and the unfolding of events after Jerry's arrival strain credibility to the point of unintentional humor. On one side, the film avoids becoming sluggish, yet this same heavy reliance on non-stop action leaves the audience with an emotionally hollow experience. The script penned by Matthew Michael Conahan, Drew Goddard, and Damon Lindelof, talented names with strong work in both cinema and television, was adapted from Max Brooks. Novel, but feels as if it were assembled on autopilot. The narrative makes little effort to develop Gary Lane or his family in a way that draws genuine care or emotional involvement from viewers. Their shared moments are scarce, mainly because Gary is separated from them almost immediately, and even a few scenes that could have carried dramatic weight, such as the wife and daughters being left on the ship, are rushed, undercut, or handled carelessly. Consequently, zombie attacks play out as mere visual spectacle, stripped of suspense or genuine impact. On top of that, the storyline shows little depth, or at least a lack of commitment from the writers. Jerry's investigation unfolds with absurd ease. Each new destination immediately presents someone who conveniently holds vital information about the outbreak and the vagueness surrounding its origins. How is it possible that no one knows where it began? Strains credibility. Further, Ultimately, World War Z feels less like a film lacking intelligence and more like one that underestimates the audience's intelligence. At one point, during Jerry's moment of realization, Forster and his team actually replay earlier footage and dialogue in a literal redundant fashion, as though viewers couldn't grasp the discovery on their own. Making matters worse, the script is riddled with gaps and inconsistencies. Whatever happened to young Tomas' parents? What purpose does he serve in the narrative? And detonating a grenade inside an airplane cabin, really unlike many genre entries, the movie doesn't even attempt to use zombies as allegories for social or political commentary. They're simply flesh eaters, nothing more. Did the writers forget that amputating the limb to stop infection spreading had already been depicted in The Walking Dead? The film also introduces a so-called update to the zombie figure. Though similar reinventions had already appeared in 28 Days Later, 2002, Danny Boyle's film had already redefined the undead, transforming them from Romero's sluggish rigor, mortis-driven corpses into fast, aggressive, and lethally intelligent predators. In World War Z, the mutation evolves. Further contamination spreads within seconds, producing a swarm that functions like a deadly amorphous flood, consuming streets, climbing walls, and overwhelming entire cities with almost no chance of resistance. Still, because so many of these creatures are crafted with digital effects, the impact feels less visceral than the practical makeup, prosthetics, and gore of traditional zombie cinema. Even so, the terror and unease they stir up is undeniable, tapping into primal fears and into anxieties about state collapse, social disintegration, and a future ruled by chaos and scarcity. Within such a bleak framework, ruthless self-preservation becomes the law of survival. One last detail worth noting, the near total absence of blood for a zombie feature. This omission was clearly a financial decision, keeping the rating low enough to capture wider audiences. Yet, it comes at the cost of betraying the very spirit of the genre. As a consequence, many deaths, zombies included, occur off-screen, with some handled cleverly, while others are resolved in a far too simplistic fashion. This doesn't entirely ruin the film, but it does pull attention away in the wrong direction. Ultimately, World War Z serves as a solid popcorn blockbuster that should satisfy anyone seeking exactly that. Once again, greetings from the darkness. Max Brooks' best-selling novel endured a grueling process on its way to theaters, countless script rewrites, heavy reshoots, an altered third act, an entirely new conclusion, and even a 6-month postponement of its release. The final cut is something that fans of TV's The Walking Dead will likely enjoy. And for others, it remains an adequately entertaining ride. Brad Pitt delivers a genuine performance as a retired United Nations investigator turned stay-at-home dad. In fact, director Marc Forster, Quantum of Solace, Monsters Ball, launches the zombie action mere moments after Pitt flips pancakes for his wife, Mireille Enos. The killing and their 2 daughters. Clearly, Pitt's skills extend beyond breakfast. His expertise is soon essential in tackling a worldwide plague caused by a virus or perhaps bacteria that may have originated in India, Israel, or Asia. The specifics don't matter much since the infection has already engulfed the entire planet. Personally, I found Pitt more convincing in the subdued family moments than in the massive CGI-driven action sequences. He fits comfortably as the devoted father and husband, though feels less convincing when positioned as humanity's ultimate savior. The flaws of this production cannot be laid at Pitt's feet. With 4 credited screenwriters plus the original novelist, the script rarely finds coherence. Yet, given the apocalyptic zombie thriller genre, the film nearly gets away with it. If you haven't kept up with zombie films since Romero's classics, prepare yourself. These aren't the sluggish, shuffling corpses of old. Instead, they move at lightning speed, scaling walls, swarming helicopters, and even toppling Jerusalem's defenses. Yes, Jerusalem. In a quirky twist, the film takes on a global travel feel reminiscent of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego as picked globetrots, more than Bond or Bourne. For many viewers, the high-octane zombie mayhem and end-of-days theme will be more than enough cinematic spectacle. For others, it's fine, but fades from memory just as quickly as I Am Legend. Here, Pitt also embraces his image as an eco-conscious figure in a relentlessly bleak and serious adaptation of Brooks' Story 1 that echoes the grim warnings of real-life pandemics long before the recent global crisis. Strongly modeled after Spielberg's War of the Worlds, the movie offers a ground-level perspective of global collapse. While no timeline is specified, an Israeli academic casually remarks, back in 2010, hinting at its backdrop, beginning with cozy family life and escalating from news reports of a rabies outbreak in Taiwan, the chaos soon erupts across the entire world. World War Z is briskly paced, anchored by capable performances, and builds an intriguing scenario. If such an outbreak ever struck, humanity would face enormous struggles. The film's exploration of viral strengths and weaknesses, coupled with the 1 out of 10 people's crazy idea might be right theory, is a clever concept. It feels like a hybrid of War of the Worlds and speculative cognition. However, the major shortfall lies in its conclusion. There's no real explanation of why the outbreak began, nor a satisfying resolution on how it might be defeated. The ending leaves audiences unfulfilled, almost as if it were setting up a sequel. Still, Pitt once again proves his acting strength, seemingly moving past the eccentric roles of Fight Club and true romance, now leaning more toward action, family-driven drama, and heroic figures. I would rate World War Z a solid 7 out of 10. The story follows Gary Lane, a former UN investigator who has left his career behind to devote more time to his family. However, his peaceful life is quickly shattered when a global epidemic erupts, transforming those bitten into feral lightning-fast predators driven by an uncontrollable urge to attack the uninfected. After barely escaping with his wife and daughters, Gary and his family are relocated to the safety of an aircraft carrier, yet their security comes at a cost. He must lead a mission alongside a virologist to track the source of the outbreak, a dangerous quest that takes him across Korea, Jerusalem, and finally to Cardiff. While I don't usually enjoy zombie films, I do have a soft spot for post-apocalyptic tailies, and this one hit the right notes. It kept me hooked throughout. The pacing wastes no time on prolonged introductions, plunging straight into chaos and rarely letting up. Critics point out its restrained gore and somewhat uneven structure, where the early large-scale sequences overshadowed the subdued ending. And while those points are fair, they didn't spoil the experience for me. I remained gripped, tense, and emotionally absorbed, with Brad Pitt giving a steady performance in the lead, though his distracting haircut is hard to ignore. The supporting cast, largely unfamiliar faces, do their part, though they mainly exist to move the plot forward. Certain choices raise eyebrows. David Morris is strange. Toothless arms dealer adds little. The Israeli soldier character feels oddly prolonged, and the towering zombie pyramid in Jerusalem makes little sense given the number of helicopters circling above, which logically should have sounded the alarm. That said, the lack of profanity was refreshing, and the 3D visuals worked well enough. The premise paints a grim picture of humanity under siege by a vicious infection that reduces people to mindless hordes. After narrowly surviving the initial outbreak, Gary reluctantly agrees to a globe-spanning mission in search of answers before civilization collapses entirely. For a summer that had been uninspiring since May, this film turned out to be a surprise standout, alongside After Earth. It was one I had little hope for, yet it proved far better than expected. Pitt shoulders the film with ease, supported by solid performances even in fleeting roles like those of Peter, Capaldi, and Ruth Negga. Director Marc Forster, despite past missteps like Quantum of Solace, crafts a slick, engaging thriller. The film delivers 3 standout set pieces: the chaotic opening outbreak, the nail-biting plane sequence, arguably the tensest moment, and the eerie final act in Wales, which is far more unsettling than one might expect. Though some sections drag, Jerusalem feels awkwardly placed and the shameless product placement is laughably bad. The movie still stands tall as one of the better blockbusters of the year. It's energetic, tense, and refreshingly free of superheroes or giant robots, making it a rare summer film that genuinely entertains. And let's not forget, this might be the only film where Brad Pitt, while dodging ravenous zombies and nursing a mild sickness, takes a moment to crack open a can of fizzy soda for refreshment. World War Z 2013 ** stars Brad Pitt, Mireille Enos, Daniella Kertesz, James Badal, Ludi Boken, Matthew Fox, Makona, David Morse, Allies Gable, Peter Capaldi, Pier Francesco Favino, Ruth Negga, and Moritz Splattru. It's a lackluster zombie disaster spectacle in which Pitt, playing a former UN operative and delivering Ein Jiv, a surprisingly flat performance, is recruited to fight against a viral outbreak that transforms people into the undead and threatens to consume humanity. Though loosely inspired by Max Brooks' best-selling novel, the uninspired screenplay by Matthew Michael Carnahan, Drew Goddard, Damon Lindelof, and J. Michael Chinsky suffers badly. The absence of convincing violence, the presence of bafflingly foolish sequences like leaving a phone on while sneaking through a zombie-filled zone in the middle of a stormy night, and the lack of visceral close-up encounters until the all-too-predictable finale expose how poorly Marc Forster was matched with this genre. His clumsy direction sinks the film even further. Anyone craving genuine tension, gritty gore, or sharp dialogue would be better off revisiting Romero's classics or a season of The Walking Dead. There are several reasons this doesn't stand out as a memorable zombie outing, most of which stem from the timing of its release. The market was already overcrowded with zombie spin-offs, parody twists, and Goro clones that all blurred together. In its attempt to feel different, World War Z ironically ends up blending into the pack. At this stage, the only ways forward are either reinventing the idea so far that it stops being a true zombie film or going back to Romero's stripped-down approach. Though no major production has attempted the latter in a serious way, this movie also suffers from its ambition outweighing its means. Flashy set pieces with sprinting hordes and mass pileups are undermined by uneven, often weak visual effects. Still, the slower and more suspense-driven third act works far better, highlighting how restraint could have improved the entire picture. Ironically, the overblown sequences often clash with the grim tone, though they provide the few moments of genuine fun. The large-scale urban assaults, such as the chaos in Philadelphia and Jerusalem, are exciting to watch, while the smaller skirmishes in the WH facility and midair on the airplane deliver tighter thrills. The supporting cast, mostly unfamiliar faces aside from Pitt, helps keep things grounded in realism, though Pitt himself looks needlessly disheveled and his on-screen wife comes off bland. At least the film keeps zombies and survivors visually distinct, though it avoids the heavy blood and gore typically expected in the genre. To its credit, the movie wastes little time in getting to the action, never letting the pace drag, and the finale ties things up cleverly enough. But truthfully, between this and Warm Bodies, it feels like the genre has run its course for now. In the end, World War Z earns 4 stars for 2 main strengths. Its relentless stream of action, sure to satisfy those who love high adrenaline cinema, and its strong zombie makeup work. The CGI, however, comes across artificial as always, so it adds little to the artistry of the film. What hurts it most are the uninspired acting and the absence of a solid narrative. Paramount and its partners could have at least given audiences a plausible origin or explanation for the outbreak. Was it New Jersey, South Korea, Jerusalem, or India? The film never commits, and that lack of grounding makes its spectacle hollow despite all the chaos. It wasn't Wales, where the outbreak first began. So where exactly did it originate, and what that triggered it? Since this is science fiction, the story could have easily offered some creative explanation to fill that glaring hole in the plot. Another questionable detail is the captured zombie in the Welsh research lab. How did they even manage to catch one? Especially when the scientists portrayed there seemed timid and unprepared. Moving on, there's the matter of the acting, or more precisely, the absence of it. Granted, in high-paced action films, there isn't always much room on performances. After all, when the majority of the cast is sprinting from one chaotic situation to the next, there isn't much to convey emotionally. But here, the few slower moments don't help either. Brad Pitt, for instance, is often shown with his mouth slightly ajar, frozen in place, while others speak, giving the impression he's dazed or worse, asleep with his eyes open. The rest of the way, mostly unfamiliar cast doesn't add much either, suggesting the film never intended to highlight real acting. Even within the internal logic of the zombies, the production overlooked something absurd. If the infection can reanimate the dead, restoring them to a state of movement and activity, why would only a shot to the head disable them? Time and again, the film shows dozens of zombies plummeting from high-rise buildings, smashing onto concrete or steel, only to stand up and charge again as though their broken bones and crushed spines didn't exist. Personally, I always welcome a well-made zombie feature, emphasis on well-made. Sadly, most I've encountered have let me down, and World War Z simply joins that list. I haven't read the source novel, but I can only assume it was far superior to this adaptation. Something definitely went wrong here. Despite the massive budget, including an expensive reshoot of the ending, the movie doesn't always look like it cost that much. Another shortcoming is the shallow exploration of the zombies themselves. Audiences never get to truly understand their nature or abilities. Why do they only bite rather than devour their victims completely, as is common in other zombie lore? The obvious answer seems to be the PG-13 rating, which deliberately avoids excessive gore or bloodshed. A frustrating choice for horror fans expecting intensity. Still, while the film isn't unwatchable, it's ultimately a major letdown. I should add that I happened to see it for free, which softened the blow. Had I paid for a ticket, my review would likely be far harsher. World War Z 2013, directed by Marc Forster and starring Brad Pitt. Mireille Enos, Fana Makona, Daniella Kertesz, and David Morris arrives during a small revival in zombie cinema. After the quirky warm bodies, Forster tries his hand at another global zombie apocalypse tale centered on survival and the fight for humanity's future. The setup feels rushed, with characters quickly introduced, only to be thrust into flight from swarms of rabid undead. Thankfully, the film regains some footing when Pitt joins a squad of soldiers tasked with uncovering a cure, delivering several tense sequences as the group is relentlessly hunted and attacked. Their journey leads from one safe zone to another, including Jerusalem, where a supposed antidote lies. Forster are known for the clever, stranger-than-fiction, and the James Bond installment Quantum of Solace offers moments of suspense, but overall the film struggles to rise above its flaws. The film's third act delivers its strongest material, centering on Pitt as he carefully navigates through a research facility filled with zombies in order to secure the antidote. This sequence introduces an inventive survival strategy that he personally witnesses during a terrifying stampede of the undead, while Pitt manages to endure a plane crash and several other near-death encounters with remarkable resilience. The supporting characters pale in comparison, so much so that the zombies appear to have more personality than the humans. Mireille Enos, as Pitt's wife, is relegated mostly to anxious expressions and clinging to their children, her main function being a source of worry after her failed attempts to reach him over a walkie-talkie. David Morse makes an intriguing appearance as a disgraced CIA agent jailed for arms dealing, but his role feels cut short when more screen time might have added real depth. Much of the chaos borders on senseless, yet the thread of optimism woven throughout does give audiences a glimpse of humanity's fight against annihilation. For all my efforts to resist, I found myself drawn into certain suspenseful stretches, bolstered by Pitt's grounded performance, tense set pieces, and striking visual effects, nearly everything clicked until the final half hour. What had built into a thrilling spectacle unraveled once confined to the sterile corridors of the lab. Although the pacing inside the facility was steady, carried by Pitt's presence and the frantic zombie attacks, the injection scene drained the narrative of urgency, leaving the film to limp toward its conclusion. The finale, heavy with bright notes of safety and hope, felt too neat, stripping away the edge and realism the story had earned. A darker, riskier ending, perhaps with Pitt succumbing temporarily to the infection or leaving humanity's survival. In doubt might have opened the door for a gripping sequel. Instead, the climactic madness, zombies piling atop one another, bullets flying, explosions igniting, pressure systems failing, was reduced to a claustrophobic standoff in a clinical setting. The movie concludes on a softened, overly optimistic note that betrays the chaos preceding it. A glossy tower of safety that feels unconvincing. Even so, World War Z remains one of the grandest cinematic takes on a zombie apocalypse, executed on an impressive scale. I delayed seeing it at first, wavering for weeks on whether it was worth it. Initially, I hesitated because of Brad Pitt's starring role, since I'm not much of a fan, and the PG-13 rating, which made me doubt its intensity. Zombie films, I felt, deserved an R. Yet after hearing positive reactions from others, curiosity won, and I was pleasantly surprised. Despite wishing for a more visceral cut, the film proved to be a solid entry in the genre. The story begins quietly with Gary and his family sharing breakfast, lulling the audience into a sense of calm before chaos erupts in the streets. Explosions ripple through the city. Civilians scatter in panic, and the terrifying outbreak unfolds in full view. From there, Gary embarks on a global mission, journeying to South Korea, Israel, and what appears to be Germany, in search of either the virus's origin or at least a viable way to stop it. The visual effects are impressive, though I still feel the movie would have been better released with an R rating. Given the massive budget, it's clear the studio wanted to secure the broadest possible audience, which is likely why the final cut was toned down to PG-13. Pitt gives a decent performance, and the film overall succeeds in building suspense. For days afterward, the sound of a door slamming or a floorboard creaking brought the movie back to mind. There's more action than I initially expected, with the highlight being the Israeli sequences where the zombies come up with terrifyingly inventive ways to reach their victims. I ended up enjoying the experience a lot, especially since it was refreshing to watch something that wasn't just a sequel or another remake. The film wastes no time, quickly throwing viewers into the chaos rather than lingering on Jerry's family life. Toward the end, the tone shifts into something resembling a stealth thriller full of tense sneaking sequences. The conclusion leaves things open for a follow-up, which I would definitely check out if it happens. From the opening scenes of panic in the streets, we share the characters' uncertainty about what's really happening. Soon Gary, our reluctant hero, faces moral dilemmas as the situation worsens. The world seems on the brink, and the audience nervously chews their nails as the suspense deepens. The film works as an engaging distraction, even if some twists are easy to see coming. While not groundbreaking, it still delivers plenty of thrills. The DVD extras emphasize how the filmmakers treated the infected as carriers of a virus with only one instinct: to spread and endure. That might have been innovative once, but nowadays, every zombie film leans into that same concept of infected humans as ruthless disease vectors. So how does a zombie movie distinguish itself in such a crowded field? First, cast a top-tier actor in the lead. Second, pour in a massive budget. Third, bring in an ALS director, and that's exactly what World War Z did. Brad Pitt plays Gary Lane, a man willing to do whatever it takes to protect his family during the outbreak. The chaotic opening sequence is spectacular, setting the tone for the large-scale mayhem that follows. With its strong score, striking visuals, sharp makeup effects, and fast-paced action, this stands as one of the more ambitious and polished zombie films. Unlike most entries in the genre, which focus mainly on gore and body counts, this one is more about survival and character. Yes, a few gruesome moments appear, but never to the point of turning away casual viewers. Even those not fond of horror could find it enjoyable. Despite a few questionable plot points, the sheer entertainment value outweighs them, grossing an astounding $544 million worldwide. It became the highest-earning zombie movie ever, joining Dawn of the Dead 204 and Train to Busan as one of my favorites. Still, as a longtime film watcher, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slightly off in certain scenes, as if pieces were missing from the source material. I hadn't read the original novel, but my instincts told me not everything. One cream came from it. At times, the plot reminded me uncomfortably of Justin Cronin's The Passage, a book I absolutely despise. The film weaves together character-building moments with bursts of action and suspense. But just when it gains momentum, bam, everything resets. The film leans heavily on flashy special effects, which often overshadow the development of its characters, leaving little depth beyond the protagonist. Most supporting figures are pushed aside as the narrative resets itself repeatedly, making the cycle frustrating after a while. To put it in perspective, I've seen films like 28 Days later where layered characters and eerie sound design truly set an unsettling tone. I've also watched classics such as Night of the Living Dead, which mixed social commentary with horror in a way that made it more than just a movie about the undead. Some productions with smaller budgets cleverly use confined spaces to generate suspense, turning limitations into strengths. World War Z, on the other hand, has a polished look, cutting edge effects, multiple global locations, and terrifying swarms of fast zombies. Yet it still falls back on the tired lone hero saves humanity trope. Even in 3D, this becomes glaring in the final act, when accomplished actors from Britain, Germany, and Italy are reduced to roles that could have been played by anyone. It felt almost ironic, like the filmmakers had great talent on hand, but sidelined them because the budget allowed it. Overall, it surpasses many zombie flicks, but the end result remains only average. Strange as it may sound, that's my honest take, and I'm curious to read the book to see if my sense that extra material was out of place is correct. There was so much negative buzz around the movie that I hesitated to see it, but the hype surrounding zombies pushed me to give it a try. The challenge is deciding what genre it really belongs to. It fits more into post-apocalyptic drama than straight horror. True horror should be frightening, or in zombie terms, gory. And neither applies here. Big-name films have often failed when attempting horror because fans of mainstream stars shy away, while horror enthusiasts demand gore and intensity, which shows like Walking Dead now deliver in spades. In contrast, World War Z lacks gore, with brutality kept off-screen and heavy reliance on CGI for its hordes. The rapid and cunning movements of the zombies, like scaling massive walls, do add a creepy touch, but shadowy alley scenes never manage to terrify. Still, fans of end-of-the-world stories will likely find plenty to enjoy. It works well as a family-friendly warm-up before diving into darker, more gruesome zombie content. The trouble is that some action moments stretch credibility to the breaking point. Yet, Hollywood's unwritten rule since the 1960s seems to allow such excess. For every $10 million a blockbuster spends beyond $50 million, audiences must tolerate at least one absurdly unrealistic sequence. With World War Z costing an estimated $170 million, viewers can expect at least a dozen eye-rolling moments. Still, compared to franchises like Fast and Furious, the movie shows more discipline and earns some respect for not going overboard, which makes it worth taking seriously. This film stands stronger than the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still and feels more inventive than Cloverfield. Even though the idea of sprinting zombies, furious zombies, or highly intelligent zombies has always seemed somewhat far-fetched, the infected in this story resemble body snatcher victims as much as traditional undead. If a sequel is ever made, what letter follows Z? Maybe it will dive deeper into their origins, or perhaps a prequel titled World War Y could fill in the gaps. As far as zombie flicks go, this one is decent, though its biggest weakness lies in failing to bring anything fresh to the genre. These creatures are essentially the same as those in 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later, except here the virus premise is quickly discarded in favor of simply treating them as the undead. The plot centers on a UN investigator, Brad Pitt, journeying across the globe in search of a solution to the outbreak. Pitt delivers a strong performance, and the movie features some thrilling large-scale sequences while maintaining a rapid pace. It leans more towards suspense than outright horror, but the PG-13 rating undermines it somewhat. I'm Marc, not someone who insists on gore, yet the constant cutting away from the violence becomes repetitive. One can only wonder if an R-rated director's cut might offer a stronger version. Unfortunately, the ultimate solution presented feels weak and unconvincing. Still, Marc Forster deserves credit after Quantum of Solace. Most assumed he shouldn't be trusted with another action project, but he shows surprising skill here. I'd recommend watching it, though not with overwhelming enthusiasm. The story boils down to Pitt's character trying to keep his family safe in a world overrun by a zombie epidemic while searching for a cure. But the real draw lies in the action and tension, which the movie delivers exceptionally well. My first viewing left me impressed with its energy, though it struck me as formula-driven. Watching it again, I realized just how much the nonstop frenzy won me over. By the third, fourth, and even 10th viewing, it had become my favorite zombie movie, fueled by its relentless, high-octane momentum. It's a pure roller coaster of one adrenaline-charged set piece after another, more effective at keeping you awake than coffee or energy drinks. What elevates World War Z above other entries in the genre is its attempt at grounding the outbreak in something resembling real life. Most zombie stories feel far removed from reality, but this one portrays everything outside the zombies with striking believability, which intensifies the desperate urgency to escape them. Pitt's heartfelt performance adds another layer. You genuinely want his family to survive, even feeling the chest, urge to shout warnings when danger is near. No matter how many times I revisit, the film hits me emotionally, which is a testament to its strength. World War Z comes close to redefining the genre, offering perhaps the most chillingly realistic vision of zombies ever put on screen. With its strong acting, polished cinematography, powerful score, and gripping execution, I honestly struggle to find flaws. For me, this film has become the gold standard of zombie cinema. Whether you're a fan of horror or action, it's a must-see. World War Z is an absolute powerhouse. Special credit goes to Marc Forster, who, despite not being known as an action director, pulled off something extraordinary here. Aside from directing a single James Bond installment, he hasn't really ventured into the realm of explosive action blockbusters. Most of his work has instead leaned toward R2 cinema, often finding its home in smaller independent theaters. Take, for instance, Stranger Than Fiction, a quirky yet inventive comedy, or Monsters Ball, a racially charged drama. Perhaps it is precisely his artistic background that allowed this zombie film to stand apart from countless others in the genre. For those who are true enthusiasts of zombie stories, practically addicted to them, World War Z is likely to deliver. Sitting stylistically somewhere between Night of the Living Dead and 28 Days Later, which happens to be my personal favorite. In fact, in tone and believability, it leans more toward 28 Days Later, with traces of Contagion as United Nations investigator Gary Lane Brad Pitt attempts to track down the source of a pandemic sweeping the globe. Horror films often thrive on implausibility. Yet the skill of this production lies in how convincingly it sells that implausibility. It's unbelievable, yes, but not absurd. Because beneath the spectacle lies a reminder of human fragility and the unpredictable wrath of nature. While 28 Days Later embraced minimalism with fewer zombies and more focus on survivors, World War Z highlights its central hero flooding the screen with close-ups, but given it's Brad Pitt, a face built for the camera. The choice feels intentional. All the familiar zombie tropes are present. The retired hero returning to action, the devoted family he must leave behind for the greater good, masses of people transforming into undead hordes, the noble comrade who gets bitten, and so forth. Yet director Marc Forster raises the stakes by creating the most visually striking zombie swarms ever put on screen, framing them almost as chillingly as historical footage of Nazi-era atrocities. For nearly 2 hours, the film rarely slows, moving with the same relentless energy as the virus itself. From Jerry's frantic attempts to shelter his family, to pulse-racing chases from zombie mobs, and finally to the tense stillness of a World Health Organization lab where he confronts the infected while seeking their weakness and a possible cure. For those who wish, the allegorical undertones of HIV or biological warfare are easy to find, but taken at face value, it remains a sharp, adrenaline-driven thriller. The premise also resonates with a frightening plausibility, as if Mother Nature herself had unleashed a modern-day Black Death to restore balance to an overpopulated world, an idea explored in novels like Dan Brown's Inferno. But for sheer entertainment value, World War Z delivers non-stop tension and heart-pounding action. Even though I personally feel the zombie theme has been overused, I thoroughly enjoyed this film, likely because it functions more as an action spectacle than a traditional horror story. This isn't a Roro-style slow burn fright fest, and anyone expecting that will be let down. A point reflected in some reviews and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.